All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Perry with Health-Pro Realty Group, and I'm going to be hosting today's webinar on the SBA relief, including the EIDL, which stands for the Economic Injury Disaster Relief, and the Paycheck Protection Program, also known as the PPP. You are in the right place if you want to hear from an SBA expert on these programs and what you need to know to apply correctly. We are also going to talk about how much money you could get and the formula for how that is calculated. We have a lot of good stuff coming up. A recorded version of this webinar will be available, and we will do our best to answer your questions at the end. We want to pack in as much good stuff as possible. As far as why Health Pro Group is doing this, one, because we received an overwhelmingly number of SBA questions from our first panel, and we want to help. So this is part of that. And second, because we know that these challenging times are not going to last forever, and we want to garner your trust in future real estate transactions. So with that said, please reach out to us if you have 2 years or less on your lease, need help with the lease renewal, tenant relief advice like we've already been doing, and just anything to talk about what your options right now are in this real estate market. We want to be there for you. And you can learn more about what we do at hprgrealty.com. Okay, so again, for those of you just getting on the call, this is about the SBA relief application and demystifying the how, when, where, and why to apply for relief. And let's be honest, every day the guidelines are changing. There's a lot of people trying to say that they're experts, confusing people. So we are going to rein that in for you today. So on that note, we have heard your questions you have sent in. Our guest has spent a lot of time trying to prepare this specifically for you and this audience. So if we don't get to your concerns today, please follow up with us after, or email me directly at bperry@hprgrealty.com. And without further ado, we have a nationally recognized small business funding expert, Kedma Ough. She is known nationally as a small business superhero, having helped more than 10,000 small business owners over the span of 2 decades. Ough holds an MBA and spent years working on behalf of the SBA as director in the Women's Business Center program and as a director statewide for small business development. Ough is the best-selling author of Target Funding, a book that provides a roadmap to help for-profit companies identify and secure money through grants and low-interest focused programs. All right. So during this difficult time, Kedma is delighted, as she has said, to partner with HPRG, and we are delighted to have her to address your most important questions and concerns, and so we can help you navigate through your business, through your practice with more ease. And Kedma is also a 5th-generation entrepreneur, a friend to our community. So let's give a warm welcome to Kedma.
Thank you. Right. Thank you. Yes.
And just a side note, Kedma and I have known each other for a couple years. And I remember seeing her on LinkedIn and being like, what in the world is that woman in the cape? But she is the most genuine, down-to-earth, no-nonsense advisor. That was the first person I thought about for this discussion. So, all right, let's get started.
Yes.
And you want me to cover your points? Well,
yeah.
Okay, so Kedma, the main points we're gonna go over are what are the main points of the EIDL program? What are the main points we need to be aware of as we consider the PPP program? And what are the requirements if we decide to enact unemployment as an option for our practice? And what other programs do we need to be aware of? All right, so Kedma, take us into the funding world.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for this opportunity. It is definitely uncharted waters. I have been serving for 20 years, and I've worked with thousands, absolutely 10,000 or more entrepreneurs, and I can tell you this is a whole new world. I also want to share that, I do dub myself as a superhero, but at the end of the day, I'm an advocate, right? I'm a business champion, and I take funding very seriously. So before we dive into the nitty-gritty, I think it's really important that we look at funding as a whole. We understand the landscape because it may be that in 10 years from now, we're going to be in the same situation. So I'm going to sort of walk you through my mind, which is dangerous, and talk about how I look at funding so that you can understand where the SBA sits, where the EIDL program sits, and where PPP sits. So I'm going to take you back to a broader place, and then from there we can trickle down to the programs. I'm going to share my screen. I'm not a PowerPoint expert, but the content is what's most important. So this is me. Yes, I do wear a cape, and it's a lot of fun. Honestly, I went from 4,000 to 34,000 connections in about a year. So my cape became pretty strong as part of my brand. Okay, so I'm going to first bring you into sort of my philosophy around target funding. If you have never heard the concept, you're familiar with your practice that not everyone is going to be considered a customer or a patient of yours. So target marketing is really identifying those demographics. It's actually the same way within target funding. The key to navigating funds for you, whether it's SBA, whether it's economic, is to understand how it plays in the bigger scheme of funding. So what I did was I created a circle here, and I'm going to put you there. Brian, we'll use you as an example. Let's suppose you own a practice, and right now you're looking at funding. And every single conversation we're going to have today falls under only one circle, the disaster relief circle, right? So when we talk about COVID-19 and we talk about SBA and we talk about all the funding relief, you need to understand that that falls into one circle. Now, why is that important for you to understand? Because the other circles also give you access to funding that you may not even have on your radar, and you need to think about it either now or 6 months from now or 2 years from now. So this just gives you a landscape that when I'm looking at funding and I'm working with companies, I'm not necessarily looking at one circle, I'm looking at multiple circles so we can identify, and then we can go ahead and apply for the funds. The second thing I want you to understand as we look at conversations related to funding is everybody wants to talk about grants. I like to think about grants as Mr. and Mrs. Google, right? We've all done this. We go online, we key in grants, and Mr. and Mrs. Google give us 160 million hits. The truth, though, is grants are actually identified through keywords. So I happen to have a background in innovation, in patent support, in research, and whenever we're researching for patents, right, we have to go through and look at the keyword that could be associated with the prior art and determine whether or not that there is a space for what we're thinking about. It's no different for grant development. This is just another circle to give you a sense of how grants could play in with just a different word. So many of you may know about the SBIR, the Small Business Innovation Research Program, which is one of the largest funding programs out of the federal government. But that's an example of a grant in the form of receiving research and development funds that is outside of the scope of COVID-19 and disaster relief. However, if we were doing a keyword search, we certainly could identify a multiple stream of where the funding is. Here's another example. Many of you may not be aware of that a lot of states and a lot of cities and counties actually have incumbent training programs where they will pay you to actually hire people, and for a given period of time, often upwards of 6 months. So most people I work with get upwards of $10,000 as a grant to pay to hire people on your team, often office specialists, to be fully trained by you. So this just gives you a little bit of a broader background when we're discussing what grants look like. Lastly, I want you to understand that everything is based on variables. So if we think about funding from a list of variables, here are the top variables that you can unlock if you have the key. So when I look through all of this, I want to reiterate that everything we're going to be talking about today, for the most part, is national funding. However, Brian sent a few questions that said, well, what about state funding? I will talk about state funding. I will talk about local funding, but this gives you just a quick, broad understanding of other grant and funding that you can tap into that is outside of our discussion today. Okay, now that we've set that level of playing field, I want to talk about the different programs. Many of you have already set out, you're in the process, you're working with your lender. However, it's still important to understand how they interface, because we're getting so many mixed messages. Some of the lenders are still building their documents. Other lenders have already started accepting applications. So this has been the biggest hype, right? Everybody's talked about the emergency advancement. It was interesting because on many of my phone calls, people were assuming that they were going to get $10,000. I mean, Brian, I would be on calls and people are like, yes, I can't wait. 10,000's coming. I keep going to my mailbox. I can't wait. Until I reminded them that the government loves to add like very little words like up and to, which changes everything, right? Up to 10,000 could mean 1,000, could mean 2,500, or it can mean 10,000. And so we want to make sure that if you're thinking that you've applied and you're going to get that $10,000 check, please do not be shocked if you don't get $10,000. We also know that the advance does not have to be repaid back, which is what everyone is excited about. However, there's always a catch. And we'll talk about what the catch looks like. But there's always a catch in every kind of design that's done. We also know that the purpose of the EIDL is to be used for payroll, for sick leave, for meeting production costs, for debt, for rent, for mortgage. This is more than just getting a grant. This is about the design of receiving a loan for up to $2 million with an interest of fixed of 3.75%. So some of our conversations are, what if you have a outstanding loan that is higher than that? It's 5%, it's 8%, it's 12%. Is there an opportunity for you to basically remodify that loan that is pretty high and put yourself in this situation? The answer is yes, and we'll talk more about that. What you have to remember is this is not the forgivable loan. This is up to 30 years, but this is not the forgivable loan. And when I put in bold, I put it in bold because these are things that people aren't talking about. If you go into most of the EIDL conversations, everybody's saying you don't need a personal guarantee. Yes, it's true. Unless you're requiring something over 200,000, then you will need a personal guarantee. So these are the details that we want to add in to let you know that it's a great program. Anything that gives me free money, I'm excited about because I love free money. However, you need to be paying attention to what that looks like. It also gives you a 6-month running start so that you don't have to worry about that loan payment happening until 6 months from the loan origination date. Now, here's the other thing. Every single EIDL conversation I've had, everybody's like, well, there's no collateral and there's no personal guarantee. Actually, that's not true. There's no collateral required for loans of $25,000 or less. But if there are loans of more than $25,000, they are going to look at some kind of security in terms of business assets. So it's a great program, but what we want to always have is our eyes wide open when we're thinking about what is the right funding strategy to support our current situation. All right. I know that was a lot, so we're going to continue. Let's now switch gears and talk about the Paycheck Protection Program, because everybody is like talking about this. This is the hottest thing right now. And so let's sort of throw in some key points to be very clear. I've gotten some conversations. Am I eligible? I happen to be a small business, but I'm a sole proprietor, or I'm treat my business as an independent contractor. Yes, yes, and yes. You are eligible. And if you have a nonprofit organization as part of your practice for some reason or another, because some have a mission to support, low income patients, for example, nonprofit organizations are also eligible. this is really interesting. So we know the max is 10 million, but if you were watching everything, first they started with 4%, then they started with, then they moved it to 0.5%, then they moved it back to 1%. I think they moved it back to 1% because a lot of the community banks probably lobbied and said, hey, we can't afford to initiate this with all the work involved and just get a 1%. This is an up to 2 years. Now keep in mind, the EIDL is up to 30 years. So it's your responsibility to figure out what's going to make sense financially for you. Again, if you're going to have any kind of up to past the forgivable loan, it is deferred for 6 months. Businesses have to have been in operation from February 15th, 2019 through June 30th. That is the primary focus. That's where we're looking at the 2.5 times max of payroll, which we'll cover. But if you're a new business, you can look at January through February 29th. The majority of the clients I'm working with have been in operation in 2019. Here we all know what's not covered. It's employee compensation that exceeds 100,000. It does not mean that someone who's making, 98,000 is not going to be part of that. But if anything that's exceeding that, if they're doing 150,000, that difference, that 50,000 difference is not going to be covered. And obviously, if there are any employees that are not residing as a citizen in the US, then they are not going to be included in that. And the loan, or the forgivable loan, can be used for a plethora of things. Payroll, if you have to give sick time, mortgage, rent, utilities, interest on debt. So this is truly a forgivable loan, and it's based on the sum of an 8-week period based on the previous year. So we're gonna kind of walk through a real life example. This is the interesting part. Later on in my conversation, we're going to talk about this refundable employee retention credit that everybody wants. However, this is part of the hiccup that if you go for that, you're not going to be able to leverage the full amount with the PPP. So they're going to be paying attention to what you consider for your credit, for your employee credit, versus what you're looking at for the PPP program. All right, so common mistakes to avoid. Number one, you absolutely can apply for both. You can apply for the EIDL, you can apply for the PPP, but they have to be different purposes. So if Brian was on my payroll, I can't count his wages in the PPP as well as in the IDL. As long as it's for different purposes, then you can use both programs. That is the biggest thing to be aware of. If the EIDL, though, was used for payroll costs, then it has to be refinanced in as a loan. They're very careful to ensure that you're not dipping into the same opportunity. So we're going to go through an example to show you how that plays. In terms of documents, this has all been pretty much streamlined by most of the banks right now. So there should not be anything in here that should be alarming. You're going to be providing them with your mortgage, your rent statement, utilities, all of your payroll expenses, all the basic things that they're going to need to determine what you qualify for in terms of the PPP program. So here is the basic calculation. It's pretty simple. They're just going to take the aggregate payroll costs for the last 12 months or for January through December of 2019. They're going to subtract any compensation paid to an employee in excess of the salary, which we talked about. And then they're going to do a simple division. They're going to look at the average monthly payroll costs, which we're going to show an example, multiplied by 2.5. And if you have any outstanding amount of economic injury disaster loan, then they're going to review that as well. So all of this will be handled by your bank. That is where you have to connect. We have been getting questions that some of the lenders are only wanting to work with their particular borrowers. They don't want to work with anyone else. Someone got frustrated and said they can't find someone. Know this, SBA has a matching lending program, and SBA has to offer this. Now they offer it through lenders, right? There's not the SBA bank. So if you run into a struggle, Brian, if they run into a struggle, they can actually do a couple of things. They can go through the SBA match lending program, which I can send you a link, or they can call their friendly SBA office and say, you've initiated this, and 3 of my lenders that I've applied said, no, I cannot work with them. And then they really have to step in and find a lender to support you. All right, so here's my little example. If you can see it, I'm just gonna walk through it. And I'm gonna show you an example where we're using both, okay? So here is an example of payroll costs for a company. So you can see payroll, rent, utilities, interest, health insurance, tax, retirement. Last 12 months for this area, it's a very small company, 249,000 divided by the average 12. And then we did the multiplier, which got us to the forgivable amount of 51,875. So here's the average per month. What I did then is I looked at, okay, if we were going to spend in the PPP that amount over 4 months, right? Because we have to spend it over 4 months. And so all I did was multiply the average per month by 4. Right here, just alone, the payroll, the health insurance, and the retirement actually comes out to 56,000. So your forgivable loan is actually going to cover up to maybe 4,000 on your own. That's going to be 100% covered, right? Now in the EIDL, what else can you spend it on? Well, you can spend it on things, again, that you haven't used in the PPP, which could include rent. It could include, oops, I just lost you, utilities. It could include interest. And so here is your 10,000, right? You would get a grant for 10,000. And so you would 15,000. So the biggest thing you want to be paying attention to, whether you're working with the SBA or working with an accountant, is to try to decipher if you can use both for different purposes so you can maximize the most that you can get for your company. All right, I want to talk a little bit about another piece of the programs, because when I think about SBA, I think about SBA as having multiple avenues to step into. They have multiple product lines. And this one is the Small Business Debt Relief Program. And interesting enough, it does provide relief to small businesses with non-disaster loans. So if you're listening right now and you have a non-disaster loan, you have the 7A, which is what the EIDL is being focused on, but maybe you have a 504 loan, right? Maybe you've purchased real estate. I can tell you in 2008, I purchased my own real estate. I didn't go through the 504, but I purchased it for 6% down, and my interest has been fixed at 0.04%. So that's less than 0.5% interest, which is kind of insane. But let's suppose in your case, you have a 504 or you have a microloan, something that's $25,000 or less. They're going to give you relief on top of this. So they're going to essentially pay for the next 6 months the principal and the interest and the fees that's associated with that loan. The interesting piece to this is also available for people who are looking at borrowing new loans within 6 months of the president signing this into bill. So I share this because if you are thinking ahead and saying, okay, does this make sense to maybe go after a loan that has nothing to do with the disaster, but maybe more around expansion as opposed to retention, then that may be something for you to consider. All right. I know we're going through a lot of deep stuff, so I apologize, but I just want to, oops, I got to go back a little. I just want to make sure I get through everything. Hold on a minute. Let me back up. This is my little technical difficulties. Hold on a minute. I'm going to share back again. Sorry, guys. Okay, I can't get back to it for some reason, but what was on my other piece, can you guys see this? Brian?
Um,
Did I
are
miss
you
it?
putting it back up? No, we don't have it.
You lost it? Okay, hold on. You always have to have one technical difficulty to just say you've done this right?
I know.
So bear with me. I've got to go back.
No, yep, we see it now.
Yep, but I've got to go through everything. 1 second. Sorry, guys. So what I'm about to show you as soon as it comes up is that the SBA also has an express bridge loan. And the express bridge loan is actually, as I'm talking, we'll get there, is actually used as a $25,000 on top of the $10,000 for the EIDL emergency loan that allows for faster turnaround because it's less paperwork. So as soon as I get there, I just want to show it to you guys, so bear with me. And Brian, as I'm going through this, are we fielding some questions? Because I want to make sure.
Looking in the chat, I don't see anything right now.
Okay,
I think we're
perfect.
okay.
All right, I'm almost there. See, this lets you know I'm human.
Yeah. And yeah, if you guys have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we can talk at the end.
Here we go. Okay, let me get past this. And we're gonna have one more. Okay, so this is the SBA loan. Currently, if you are working with an SBA Express lender, most people don't even know if they're working with an SBA Express lender, because it's not like you get the loan and say, hey, by the way, are you an Express lender? So if you're not sure, just give them a call and find out. This is just what we call bridge money, emergency money. Just know this, if you decide to act on this, I don't even know if it's even going to be available because so many people right now are trying to hit the system. Then it is a bridge, literally a bridge until you get your economic injury disaster loan, assuming they approve you. So this is something that you can check with SBA to say, you know, am I eligible for the $25,000? What is the paperwork? And how fast can I get that money in my bank account? So now we're going to switch gears. One of the things that we've been talking about for the last few minutes, last half an hour, is federal. However, when we first started, I told you that there were different circles. And one of the circles we have to pay attention to is, what is your state doing? What is your counties doing? And what is your city doing? And the reason this is so important is because these have a very, very fast turnaround. For example, I reside in Oregon. Prosper Portland, which is part of the economic development for Portland, came out with $10,000 grants, 48-hour window. So you could have qualified and waited 48 hours and you would have not actually had an opportunity to get it. I have seen this across the board. I have seen it in Seattle. I saw one that had an application. They were looking at supporting $25,000, and 160 applications came in, and they shut it down in 4.5 hours. So Brian, the most important thing I'm going to cover here is do not wait on this. The first one is Maryland. This is an interesting one. Grants up to $10,000, not to exceed 3 months of cash operating for Maryland businesses, 50 or fewer employees. If you look at the bottom, working capital, payroll, rent, mortgage, utility. Now, don't double dip. So if Brian and I were working in Maryland, I would say to Brian, I know you're going after the EIDL for up to $10,000. I know you're also going after the PPP. Can you do a spreadsheet so that you're not duplicating and maybe go after this grant for up to $10,000? Because now you're diversifying your funds. You think about financial planning, you're not going to go to your financial planner and say, hey, I have $100,000 to play with. Can you just put it on one stock, right? So this is your ability to mitigate risk and diversify. So if you're in Maryland, you definitely want to look at this. I don't know if they're still accepting applications, but I looked at it yesterday and it looked like it was still open. I then want to go into, this is an interesting one. This is in Virginia. This is counties. So you may be thinking, well, I'm not in that county. You want to check your county. So you can easily just key in, you know, COVID-19, small business grants, and your county. This county is giving $93,000 to small businesses. They're going to award 18 grants, a maximum of $5,000. Everything adds up. Look at their priority though. This is based on not only a targeted location, but a targeted industry sector, which is why it's so important to understand how money flows. They're very specific here. They want to support manufacturing, healthcare, transportation, logistics, and construction. So if you happen to be in healthcare,
isn't it a great time to be in
isn't it a great time? You want to be
yeah.
thinking about this, right? If this means an extra $5,000 to keep your office assistant on payroll, do it. This is not a pride issue. The money is going to go somewhere. If you're not in it to play, you will not get it. That is a guarantee. Now we're going to trickle it down even further. If you happen to be in New York City, this is New York City's program. It does not mean that New York City doesn't have a program in other parts of New York, and it doesn't mean that the state doesn't. This is just an example where they are offering $75,000 interest-free loan. Now let's pay attention to this. You're thinking about the PPP and you're thinking about the EIDL, but you know that the EIDL has a tag of 3.75%. If you were based in New York City, why would you go for the EIDL at 3.75% if you needed a small amount and not apply for the $75,000 and get 0%? So this is where you have to really be strategic and ask yourself, can I slice? I always think about funding like a pizza pie. Can I slice different parts of that pie so I can maximize the best interest? And obviously the best interest is 0 for what I need. Okay, I'm gonna switch gears, Brian, as questions come in. I wanna just preface, here's my preface. I am not an employment lawyer. I do not do employment law. However, there were some questions that came up. So this is just some brief information. And I think, Brian, you mentioned that you had an employment lawyer or someone who was working on the employment
initial panel. Yep. We had somebody come to discuss some of this. Right.
Okay. So let me tell you one of the challenges we're seeing, because I work with hundreds of companies around the country. This is fantastic, right? I mean, who doesn't want this? I know in New York, the typical weekly unemployment can be as high as $500. You add 600, that's 1,100. So somebody could be making off unemployment, you know, for a period of time, you know, $4,400. Here's the problem with small businesses. Some of the people going on unemployment are making more than they did when they were working with their employer. And so a lot of the small businesses are trying to figure out how do they compete with the fact that they may have an office staff who is typically on a typical full-time position, happens to be making less. And our conversation is, this is temporary, right? So you want to just have that conversation. This is temporary, and we are really looking to rehire you back. The other thing I want to share is there's a lot of questions about the sick leave. I saw that. So I just threw in a couple of things to pay attention to. Yes, the sick leave is available for up to 80 hours. And yes, it does include if someone does not have childcare while the schools are closed. And so I want to give you an example that I found that I like. So if an employee you're working with doesn't have childcare, and let's suppose they're sick or something's going on, for the first 80 hours of any period of leave to care for the child, they are actually qualified for sick leave wages, up to $200 per day, $2,000 in the aggregate. And after that, they actually move into qualified family leave wages. So, you know, this is an interesting part of, you know, how everything is played out. Yes, the PPP expects you to rehire them. They want to rehire them at the full-time wage you had, because that's the whole point of the PPP. But here's the caveat, Brian. A company may not get both a PPP loan and the tax credits described. So remember when we first began, we're looking at all these incredible opportunities. Yes, there's a refundable tax credit. Yes, you can get 50% or more. However, the government is going to look at all the programs you're applying, and they're not going to allow you to double dip. So one of the things you have to pay attention to working with your accountant is that spreadsheet to think, what is going to be really best for my company? Because I have really an a la carte opportunity right now to work with multiple programs, but I need to be mindful that the government's going to pay attention to the programs you're choosing, and they're not going to allow you to duplicate. All right, I am now going to pause because I think I covered a lot. And so, Brian, I would love to open up for questions or clarifications.
Right. So in terms of the kind of the order of operations, do you apply, should the doctors and everybody be applying local first, federal first, and what's the actual timeline to kind of get the money? Because the sooner they get the money, the sooner they can rehire and do those things.
Right. Here's the challenge. Of course, I'm going to tell you to apply for the PPP, but don't expect it to be in your bank account tomorrow. The problem you have with not applying for the local or state right now is I will guarantee you that that window will close very fast. I will guarantee you. And so if you can do a little bit of research just to see what programs are available, two things can come from that. Number one, you're going to realize that there are some incredible programs that your own city, your own state are offering that you should be leveraging. And number two, it doesn't preclude you from what you have to do with the bankers. But if you're trying to call the banker today or tomorrow and they're like, I'm going to get back to you in 3 days, you can just spend an hour going online and researching. I am happy to share my PowerPoint, but what you want to do is tag those because they're going to go very fast.
Okay, we have a question here. I am on draw. How do I get paid?
Yes, that is a great question. So this is a part of the SBA and what the government is trying to figure out is how do we identify the actual draw you're receiving and constitute that as payroll, because you don't have an easy setup, right? If you look at how the PPP protection is set up, it's like they want your payroll stubs, they want to see what payroll taxes you've done. And so I know with the new ruling, they're looking at the company's net income, but from that perspective, I think they're going to look at bank statements and they're going to try to figure out whether they can decipher that was your essential owner's draw if you were a LLC or a sole prop. And that's the particulars that you really have to work with your banker. The good news is they can't exclude it, but I haven't seen in the language where they actually communicate owner's draw. So we are getting a lot of questions on how is the bank going to really decipher that what they took out was truly an owner's draw or in the form of a salary.
Great. Okay. Did you see this question in here about the employees? I think we kind of went over this, right?
Let me see. I haven't.
So I can read it to you if you want.
Please.
If you have employees that would be eligible for the FFCRL, that's the kids at home because of school, what is better for them and their practice, their business? For the businesses to pay 75% of their pay or to furlough them and encourage them?
It's an excellent question. Boy, that's a tough question. I think you want to look at your state. It may make sense to actually put them on unemployment temporarily. However, if you're deemed an essential business and you need to have your business operating, it may not make sense for your practice, right? I think you have to first decipher how critical that individual is for your practice, and then determine what is better for them. If they're not able to function in your office, are they able to telework? If they're not able to telework because they're managing, 3 kids under the age of 5, and they're not a critical part of your business, then it may make sense to temporarily put them on unemployment. If you have a fear that they're going to be exposed in some way, and then you're going to have to put sick time, then you may want to consider unemployment. So whatever decision you do, you want to just make sure that you communicate it's a temporary. I have some companies that actually are deemed essential business right now, Brian, but they've actually chose to shut down because of all the challenges that they're being faced with, you know, within their own community. So for the person who asked, this is an excellent question. I would actually sit down and look at the variances, actually see what they would qualify with, and then see what the employee wants to do. What's going to be best for the employee?
All right, we have another question. I have 2 different dental practices. Will that affect my application, and how much will I receive from the government?
So the 2 dental practices, if they're under the same EIN and they're just different locations, they're going to look at the total amount of employees that are under the umbrella of the company. If it's 2 separate companies, 2 separate missions, 2 separate EINs, then you may look at applying for 2 separate situations. In most cases, people are under one company, and so they're just going to look at the totality. So they're going to ask you for the total amount, right? So if you have 4 or 5 locations, the total amount of employees that have been under your company. So, you know, you would add in 5 plus 6 plus 8, and whatever that total payroll is, multiplied by the 2.5. You heard that, Brian?
I heard that. That was great.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking because I know a dentist that I talk to, you know, they have to make a decision between closing their office or, you know, staying open, doing elective surgery, because I believe there was something separate sent to them from the government or the dental association saying that it's up to them, you know, to use their best judgment as doctors. There's another question here. Let me see if you.
And Brian, can I just add to that before we go? I think it's really important to know it is up to you. I'm dealing with a case right now where a business did decide to stay open. It is classified as an essential business in the community. One of the employees got sick and passed away today.
Oh, well, oh man.
Okay, so I can tell you right now, it is not a good scene. No, it wasn't the company's fault. However, the risk you take on could be detrimental, and you need to have contingency plans in place. What does this look like? This person was on the payroll. And so, you know.
All right. Well, I don't want to end on that note,
but I want to just say.
But I understand. Okay. So we have a question. If you're behind in taxes, can you still get the PPP?
Yeah. So there's some conversations around that you really have to really look into, because there is some discrepancy on whether or not you're going to be qualified for that if you've not paid your taxes. However, there's one thing about abandoning your taxes versus being on a payment plan. So you want to just get that clarified, because if you're on a payment plan, you've not abandoned your taxes. You're not refusing to pay taxes. You're on an SBA or you're on an IRS approved payment plan. So that's a conversation you want to have. But
because I heard it from the initial stimulus that they were sending money to people, but people were concerned, like, hey, you know, I have these back taxes. Am I not going to get any money from it? But I think there was something there that's saying you're still going to get you know, money. I mean, the money that's there. But this is, you know.
Yeah. Now there's a difference if you're not paying child support, because I can promise you that they're paying attention to that. Not that anybody here listening is, but those kind of things they're going to definitely pay attention to.
Another question. No money has been sent out. When is the date the government is planning to send money out?
Okay. Hello. I've worked for the government on and off for 15 years. The government doesn't work like we do. They, you know, the interesting thing is, remember in the EIDL, it said, you know, sign here 10,000 and we're going to give you a response in 3 days. It's actually 3 days from the time that they actually review your application. It's not 3 days from the time you submit. So what I would suggest is just banking on it may be a couple of weeks. I have some people who've just received it, who just started really, really early. But, you know, again, nobody's given a time. It's based on their decision on when they're going to review your application. So in the meantime, if you're not doing this already, definitely see if you can get an increase in your line of credit, because it's so much easier to have that extra. I've also had clients do a negotiation with their credit card companies to reduce their interest for a significant time. One of my clients got a major company to go from 16% to 3% for 90 days. So if you need that kind of cash infusion, you may want to just go to lowest hanging fruit right now until the money comes in.
What time we got?
We're good.
All right.
Yeah. How we doing?
I know
on
you're on
questions?
the Pacific time over there, so.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So here's a question. We stopped paying the bill. Was that the wrong thing to do?
Which bill? All bills. So here's
Yeah.
what I would say. Never, never abandon a bill. Always call and say, is there a relief happening? Many of you are landlords. I'm a landlord, and I can tell you right now, my tenants asked for relief. And
we're talking with some of the doctors about some tenant relief kind of option thing. So that's that's kind of what we're trying to work through. But yeah, other things. This might be. I'm not sure specifically which bill, of course.
So I would just call them up and say that given this time, you cannot pay it right now. What is the relief that's available? And almost every company has been accommodating except one who said, nope, it's business as usual. You will have to pay, and we're not doing anything.
And they clarified with all bills. So it's very, I mean, I'm sure, all bills. So that was a clarification.
Yeah,
so,
all bills. As long as you let them know. What we don't want is we don't want the abandonment and then the presumption that you are not actually going to do anything. Keep in mind, everybody is not talking about this, but I'm going to talk about this. Nobody's talking about how your credit score is going to be impacted. So my understanding is that the Senate had a bill that said that they were going to try to hold back your credit being impacted by 4 months. I feel like, wait a minute. So we get to mess up everything. And then 4 months later, Experian is going to let us know how it's impacted us. So just be mindful. Don't take more than you need, and realize that it is going to hit your credit score. Here's my thoughts on that. If you're someone who has a credit score of 800 and you know it's going to significantly bring you down, by 60 points or 100 points, definitely make sure. However, if your credit score is like 500, don't worry about it, because you're already in a difficult situation, and leverage what's best for your company. And I'm speaking from someone who went from, 20 years ago going bankrupt to reversing that. So that's kind of my thoughts on how to make your decision when it comes to credit score. All right, Brian, I'm listening.
all right. Well, that was the last one that came in. I'm trying to. In terms of when they prioritize like healthcare, because there's other money in that bill going to healthcare, and there's a strategic way they're asking and all those things. Is there any way for doctors and physicians to kind of prioritize, or is it just based on them banking with the bank, that kind of thing, or do they get a healthcare priority? Is there something they need to know there?
Well, let's talk about it from a national and then bring it down to the statewide. Nationally, they're going to keep everything pretty consistent, right? Because they're not going to segment by healthcare necessarily. Unless there's a specific thing going to, more masks. What they're really going to do is make sure that they can create uniformity, and small business is small business. Everyone gets it. On a state level, they definitely could prioritize by industry clusters. They could say, we've identified in our state the 5 industry clusters, and we're going to back the funding towards that. Now, a lot of the money we're getting is kind of the front end of things, but we never look at the back end. The back end is procurement. If you're not already tied in to aligning with government contracts, you would be shocked how much money the government allocates for just setting up various programs or training or education, and that's procurement. And so if I had to give you the immediate action list, Brian, I would say local first, state second, feds third, not, and it doesn't mean you have to wait like weeks, but just to realize it's based on timeline. And then number 4 is to look at government contracts, because I guarantee you it's going to come down fast. And it's super nice to get a government contract. I have had just one small contract I've had for the last few years that's already yielded me $500,000. And I'm the sole owner, right? So every time the contract comes up, it's me, right? Because they can't compete against the contract because I developed the particular program.
Next question. Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Good.
Yeah.
What should I be expecting guidance from my accountant?
That's a great question. You know, I love accountants. I think it's
yeah. First of all, we all need a trusted advisor.
Absolutely.
Like that. So I absolutely understand this question 100%.
Look, the law is the law is the law, but the interpretation of the law is always open to the accountant, right? How conservative are they? How lenient are they? What do they think is best? You need an accountant that has almost a business mindset. You need an accountant who's going to look at all these programs, understand your practice, and say, you know what, Tom, this is what's best for your company, and here's why. So I would definitely have that conversation, but I would ask your accountant, why are you proposing this? What makes you think this is the best route? And are there any options that I have not even thought about that you think I should look at? So that's really important.
And I think, you know, in terms of doing the real estate transactions and stuff, we really try to talk about, there's a legal side where we need a lawyer to have that, but you also need a business side to kind of negotiate that. That's not part of the lease.
Of course.
Business side is saving you money. Like Dr. Peter, have you had docs successfully negotiate lease rates for longer term cost reduction? Yes. Versus short-term payment forbearance. So, yes.
That's a question to you.
Yes, that's a question. I mean, in terms of now the negotiation, that's a conversation we probably have offline because it's away from SBA, but that is definitely something that we can have a conversation about, talking about that. But yeah, in terms of the accountant, I definitely agree. I mean, sometimes they're trying to keep up with everything.
Agreed.
And they're trying to give business advice because they're going to know the numbers, right? But adding in that kind of business sense, I guess that's what I would look for, I guess, right?
And Brian, I think to your point, each of you listening to this, you have to be your own advocate. When I go and meet with my accountant, I say, Tom, here's what I know, X, Y, Z. This is what I'm proposing, X, Y, Z. Tell me otherwise, right? I want him to know, or if you're talking to a female accountant, I want her to know that you're educated enough to know the different programs. And it's so important because sometimes accountants do just that. They're just checking it off, but they're not strategically thinking about how does this support my business?
Exactly, because there's a lot of factors that come in. And each deal we do, something different is coming up. So this is not like, oh, yes, that's a law, you know, but then, hey, can you do this? Can you do that?
Right.
It's not, you know, the business side of things. So,
Brian, I want to share with the group, one of my favorite lessons I learned from my patent attorney is one day I was asking him about just strategic positioning of patents. And he said, listen, Kedma, I'm paid to determine if it's patentable. I'm not being paid to determine if it's marketable. I was like, okay, I got it, right? So I think to your point, it really depends on where they're coming from.
Right. All right, we got about 5 minutes, maybe max left, right, Kedma?
Yep. Any more questions that came up?
Don't see any more questions yet.
Perfect. So, and we talked about the SBA lenders. If you run into a problem, you can call the SBA. The other thing I want you to know, if you're not aware, in every single state, we have what's called the Small Business Ombudsman. Yes. So the Small Business Ombudsman is someone that actually works on your behalf, but people don't know about the Small Business Ombudsman. In Oregon, we call it's actually this woman called Ruth. And I have had to call Ruth because the Small Business Ombudsman's job is to basically step in if a government agency is keeping you as a business owner from getting what you need. We often have had to do it with permits, with licensing. And so I'm mentioning this because if you get into a hiccup and you're frustrated, you can just go online, go to your state, and have a conversation with the Small Business Ombudsman, because no agency wants to get a call from them. All right, I think we have 4 minutes, but we can also wrap up if there's no other questions.
Yep, I'm not seeing any more questions. I think this is the wrap up time. Thank you so much for being on here. To everybody attending, thank you for asking questions. Thank you for listening. And again, yes, you will get email contacts. Yes. Email contacts later. You can still email, ask some questions. There will be a recording. And I hope you guys, you know, the healthcare community, the doctors, everybody gets something out of this, and hopefully more people will see on the replay too. And you know, see that this really helped them. And all right, so that's the end of it. Thanks a lot, guys. And I guess Tom, we can leave, or I can hit the leave button.
And thank you for putting this together, guys. I think education is the key, so I appreciate you allowing me to participate.
Oh, thank you for being here. All right.
Okay.
Talk to you later.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.